Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Lupe Leos and I'm a student from California State University, Long Beach. I'll be your host for this panel. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our panelists for our extended reality panel. First, we have Jessica Cantor. She is the executive producer at The Look Club and is also a freelance creative director. Next, we have Noelle Mazurak. She is a production coordinator at Gains for Change. Next, we have Will Roberts. He is the lead experience designer at HarperCollins and the creative commissioner at VR Diamond League. Lastly, we have Lawrence Yang, and he is a designer working on Steam VR hardware and software at Valve. Welcome, panelists. It's very great to have you all here.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So our first question, we would like to get a short overview about your journey with your career. So where and what did you study, and a quick run through of your work history to get to where you've been. Let's start with Jessica.
All right, great. So I guess I went to college at NYU. I was in the Gallatin School of Individualized Study, where I combined filmmaking and computer science, which I had no idea would actually become a merged part of my career. When I graduated, I went directly into film development in New York. So I worked, Weinstein Company, Sony Pictures, a few of the other local stuff, and then left to do content marketing. And after about a decade of content marketing, I ran live content and marketing for Livestream. And then from there went and ran content marketing for Sundance, where I was introduced to virtual reality. And when I was there, I left my job and decided to start creating work in that space to understand how to tell a story in immersive media. After doing that work, finding branded work to get paid to do that work, I'm still doing that work, traditional filmmaking as well, and started something called the Look Club, which is an immersive database of immersive content where we review and discuss immersive media, interactive storytelling, kind of in all of its forms across AR, VR, and XR.
Thank you. Next, Will, why don't you start?
Okay, cool. Yeah, so my name is Will Roberts. So I started my career way back when I was a wee boy, drawing in sketchbooks and doing graffiti on walls and stuff like that. But yeah, so my undergrad degree was actually in African studies. So I actually played football at the University of Oklahoma, which outside of football, I was always into building computers, drawing things, making things. And then I got an MFA degree in 3D animation and interactive art. So I come from the animation and film background, but also as my master's thesis, like the studies were human interaction in virtual spaces. So I got into stuff like Second Life, Sims and stuff like that. End up building worlds for brands inside of Second Life. So as a job, as a researcher, and that stuff taught me a lot of things that I know today. I end up, so making games inside of games was the thing I kind of learned from. And then kind of fast forward, so one of my first jobs out of college was out of grad school was HarperCollins. So I started off as almost like a low-level interaction kind of designer. Then I kind of moved up. I was working with a group that's called the Emerging Technologies Group. So our job was to reimagine what books or stories look like in the future. And like that stuff just kind of clicked. And around 2015, I started my own studio, and just kind of like, taking my background as, learning from the African studies, the pedagogy of storytelling, as a filmmaker, animator, and mashing up like games with all the stuff that I pretty much love until now. Having my background in storytelling and also as an athlete, getting into VR in the early days of VR, because I think we're still early, but I was super early. And like looking at esports looking at VR gaming more of a actual sport than just a game. When your body's involved, when your brain is involved, you're moving people around different spaces. I see it as another layer of reality. So I kind of landed on starting to, just kind of started doing pop-up tournaments, pop-up events and stuff like that. And like from a designer standpoint, there was more like almost like UX experimentation and training. So I was like, let me make my own thing that could sit well within this realm of VR esports, which don't at the time didn't really exist, and I'm just trying to usher that in, and that's how I kind of land on today. Long-winded. There's still some pieces maybe missed out of that, but I'm gonna let everybody else talk.
Thank you. Okay, Noelle, next.
Awesome. So, hi everyone. I'm Noelle Mazurik. I'm a production coordinator at Games for Change. I started my kind of XR career with similar to Jessica, NYU. I have a game design major and a minor in producing. I was knee deep in XR courses and classes, and it was something I was really excited about. I interned at the Tribeca Film Festival, which has a showcase very similar to Sundance every year. I see Jessica pointing. I know we're kind of in the same vein, which is really fun. But Tribeca Immersive is really kind of about how VR and AR can tell stories. And so highly recommended, super cool if you haven't checked out some of the work that they show. And from there, I kind of continued to work seasonally with them, gradually getting more responsibilities from managing specific exhibits to kind of managing the entire experience hall. And then in 2019, I was offered an XR fellowship from Games for Change, which supported the development of XR for Change as an initiative. And it's all about how XR and VR AR storytelling can be used for social impact causes and for good. So like how Oculus VR for Good has programs, and how these kind of different, how we're seeing a lot of different VR and AR work that's specifically towards social impact causes in different foundations. I also supported the writing of a white paper, and in a COVID-free world, I traveled around the country and taught middle school students about programming and how to get started with VR and AR at a young age. So now I've stayed with Games for Change full time, working with a lot more than just XR, but it's still something that's super near and dear to my heart, and it's awesome to get to talk about it.
Thank you. And lastly, Lawrence.
Hey guys. So let's see. I started my career, I guess, in high school, sort of like Will did when I was a wee kid. Around the time Flash became a thing, dating myself with that, but I was one of the first designers, web design developers to work in Flash, and that's sort of how I started my career. I did freelance work doing Flash design. When I went to school, my major was industrial design. This is in the Midwest. I went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And after I graduated, I moved to the West Coast, San Francisco. Worked a couple of years as an interaction designer in ad agency, and then moved to Apple, where I worked in the marketing group for a few years. And then I moved to the product side and worked in the human interface team under Johnny for iOS, OS 10, Watch, everything. I was at Apple for about 8 years. And then about 5 years ago, Valve reached out and said, hey, we're working on VR stuff. We need someone to help us figure out how it's going to work. And that was sort of the beginning of everything, this latest revival of VR. So I was super interested in that. So I left and helped them ship the HTC Vive and Steam VR. So I worked a lot on those interfaces and the user experience and setup and all of that kind of stuff. After that, I worked on the Valve Index. I led the Knuckles team, or the Valve Index controller team. And we shipped those. And now I'm working on some other stuff that I can't talk about, but it's been really fun. I really love working on UX, and VR it's one of those rare occasions where you have a chance to help shape a landscape that's not fully formed yet.
Thank you, Lawrence. So for our next question, we want to know exactly what an overview of your position's like. What exactly do you do? What are your responsibilities? What would you say is a typical day for you? And is there anything you think people would not expect regarding your position? Whoever wants to start may go.
I'm happy to start. I have a pretty non-traditional job, which I'm freelance and kind of have my own company. And so I don't have a structure. I have to make my own structure in the day. I have worked in companies to get here, which is kind of a goal for myself. But I get hired as a creative director, especially on immersive projects, by either an agency or a brand, and help write and scope out what the project's going to be, and then bring it to life. And so every project is a little different, which is what's so exciting. So I would say every day brings something different. It's especially weird in a COVID world because we're not going into offices to connect with teams, and you're constantly working with a new team. So you're learning how to connect immersively, or over Zoom or video, just like we're all conversing here today. But yeah, so every day, I guess, is different. I never know what to expect. Even the days I think I know what to expect, it ends up being completely different. But I would say like the things that help is that I structure my own day. I make room for my creative work, and then my other kind of like business work, which is the emails and pitching and trying to get myself more work so that I'm able to continue to dive creatively into the project I'm working on, but line up my next project. And the Look Club is a passion project. So we have conversations every week on Clubhouse where we talk about immersive storytelling, how to build worlds, how to tell. We want the storytelling to help drive the technology. So we want to really get in front of how we tell stories in these new spaces. And so that's really kind of, as anyone starting their own business, like creating your own structure around it and coming up with how you want to promote it and build the assets. I think that answers the question. I also want to say to Noelle that when I was at NYU, they did not have XR classes yet. So I'm very jealous of you.
Yeah, they're pretty awesome. They were great. I loved a lot of the program. Super cool. I'm happy to kind of hop in next with something more non-traditional. I mean, working at a nonprofit is very different because it's a lot of experience at once, and it's not just XR focused. Many times you wear many different hats. But a day-to-day kind of looks like coordinating the Games for Change virtual festival every year, which happens in July. And this year it's going to be virtual. We're having some really cool development on that coming soon. I manage the various programs and events throughout Games for Change. So not just XR, but whenever there is an XR project, that is something I'm kind of seeing as well as the XR for Change lead. We do a lot of really cool stuff, from brain jams to hackathons to talk and play events where we sit down with creators and hear about some of their work and how they came up with their ideas. So it's everything from working with developers to explore new ways to get them involved with our communities, taking calls, multitasking on different projects, and being super flexible. I think that's kind of the takeaway for that piece.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That gives our audience a much better view. Oh, Lawrence, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Oh, are we all going, or do we have to?
If you feel comfortable with answering this, then go ahead. If you have something else you want to add, you may add it right now.
All right, I'll just share really quickly. Valve is sort of a weird company because we don't have managers. So our days are probably a little more similar to Jessica's in that like we make our own schedule, we figure out what we're going to spend our time on. So whether that's just like being heads down with work or meeting with folks, presenting work, or just getting stuff done, every day is a little bit different. It just depends on what the needs are, and it's up to individual people on the team to figure out what the most valuable use of our time is.
And I think for me, my day sounds like all of their days. kind of melded into one. I think the only thing that's different for me, so like as an indie game creator that's working on VR local multiplayer stuff, trying to figure out how to make a bubble like the NBA, and trying to figure out what those game mechanics look like when people are near each other. I think that's the one thing that's different from everybody here, which is a challenge. So good.
Thank you. That's all very insightful. So for our next question, it's more focused about the skills that you need to be successful. What would you say you need to be successful? And are there specific programs that you use in your day-to-day workday that you think are especially crucial? We can start with Lawrence on this.
Sure. Well, I mean, so both soft and hard skills are needed. I think just as a designer in general, the way I generally look at it is like it's 50-50. Half of our job is doing the work itself and make sure that it's a good user experience, really understandable and clear. and the other half is communicating it to the folks who are stakeholders, whether they're the people who are going to be building it or approving it, and also the end user, and making sure that the thing that you made that's a great experience, you have to also be able to communicate why that's a good thing to build, as opposed to either what's there or what might be easier to do from a technical perspective. So that's the hard and the soft, I think, the two sides of the coin. But as far as software goes, I mean, I think everyone, like, we've all switched over to using Figma for quick sketches and communication and collaboration. Prototyping stuff in VR. We have our own engine called Source 2, so we'd use that to block stuff out. But when we're working with other folks or outside vendors, a lot of times Unity will be a common go-to for just like quickly blocking out and testing interaction design and spaces.
Yeah, I'll go. Yeah, I think communication is probably number one. When you design things with teams, I think time management is huge, because there's always a deadline. There's always somebody lurking. Hey, when is that thing going to be done? Type of thing. There's always deadlines. Also, I think just like listening to, a lot of it, just like listening to the person's needs and trying to take that in and kind of go back to my first point, just communicating the idea in a way that's clear. Also, yeah, so like software. So things like UX, stuff like Sketch, InVision. Sketch is a real good one. Like Figma is a really good one. Let me see what else. XD, Adobe Xd. If you're in Adobe Cloud, that's one. Unity is really good for a lot of different things. I think, yeah, you're just kind of almost like learning one engine is good, but like Unity to me is, everything is free, and it's kind of, there's tons of documentation. I like Unreal myself too, but I think Unity is a good way to get in. And for me, the thing that pushed me was like learning one 3D software. If you want to do 3D, like learning 3D space. A lot of my learnings actually came from like just knowing how to model something. So so as a skill set, my skill set is like modeling first, and then the UX second. But also, I learned a lot from architecture too, just like reading tons of architecture books. So as a kid, that's all I did. Like it was drawing and wanted to build buildings. But then now all this stuff is kind of coming into play, like knowing how things react spatially for me, like took me over the edge. Yeah, so spatial things, I think those kind of hard and soft skills, that's kind of the baseline for me. Software and just knowing, just diving deeper into how humans interact with things. It doesn't have to be games. It's just purely how we move through the world.
Yeah, I would kind of extend on some of what both Will and Lauren said. Like, when you're sharing creative ideas, learning how to pitch and articulate them is so important. But also, like when we're concepting an immersive piece, some pre-COVID, when we got to work together in a studio format, we could actually put it up on its feet to kind of feel the distance from each other and kind of understand, like physically, what it would feel like as we translate it into a digital world or into an immersive VR world, which was really helpful. I also am even though I took computer science, I'm a terrible coder. And so but I do find it really helpful to understand how the game engine works and understand virtual production workflows. And so as you're concepting stories and experiences, you understand that what has technical risk and what doesn't, so that you can decide how much technical risk you want to take on any given project. I guess, and the other, I think my other software that I use a lot is like even simple things like Google Slides to help present concepts before we're able to kind of get into the immersive space. I love movement, so I actually use GIFs a lot to help illustrate an idea or concept or a feeling. And so really trying to get that feeling as tactile as possible. So as we move it into production, everyone knows and are telling the same story and creating the same experience. I also love creating color palettes and mood boards. So like Pinterest is a big tool of mine because I think having that layer of texture really helps as you're going into design, kind of outside of the UX experience. So those are some of the kind of additional tools I'll add to the plate.
Yeah,
Yes,
I mean, I think totally. Pinterest for sure. Yes, I was nodding my head along. Oh my God. But I mean, just to add one last piece to this, I mean, you know, being open-minded and collaborative and flexible are really key for any career you choose to go in, especially when we're building worlds and creating stories. Since this is a tech industry, always be eager to learn new things. You know, whether that's learning Unity or trying out a new software, it's all a part of the process to learn, and you'll always be building your skills. You'll never be like starting on like a different like chord or doing something totally fresh. You're always building on what your core knowledge is yourself.
Totally, I like to second that too, because I think a lot of students come into like, oh, I have to learn Unity, Unreal, Blender, all these things. Like, I think, yeah, kind of what you just said. Like, if you just land on your core knowledge, like, and knowing the foundations of that stuff, a lot of things will spawn out of it. Yeah, that's it. That's all. 2 cents.
Okay, moving forward, we need to have our responses a little bit shorter as we are running a little bit low on time. So for our next question, what differences are there between developing for VR and AR and then developing for standard mobile, console, or PC?
I would say world built, like where the user exists in the world. Because if you're looking at it from a user perspective, you're immersing yourself inside the experience versus a 2D game. I think a really good example is how like some of the like zombie scary games that are really intense for a console experience or 2D experience, like you can take the amount of shock, but when you put somebody in it in VR, it becomes too scary and almost traumatic to experience it. So really understanding the weight of what it means to actually physically be there, and immersive in VR is really like creating a memory. And so understanding how what you're doing to your viewer or your user or participant is takes much more care, I think, in that sense.
Yeah, I think just like what Jessica's saying, this kind of like personal first person perspective can really make a difference in specifically like VR settings. Raycasting is this thing that headsets do where they're actively kind of throwing out rays to see what the player is looking at. And I think that that's like a very core difference, because you're not just looking at what the controllers are doing, but where the player is looking, and being able to track that very like specifically can often create some really interesting or unique interactions in immersive experiences. So I think that's a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, both of those things are just, I echo both of those, but also just like your body too. So like having gameplay where you can like actually duck underneath a table and pick up something instead of like pressing A to duck to go underneath something. I think that plays a lot in it too. Yeah, just your body being a part of the actual space and what that looks like from like when your body is the controller. So that's it.
Yeah. The other thing to think about is ergonomics and also just visuals in terms of like when you're creating UI in the VR space. If you're doing floating panels, like there's a difference between having a really big panel that's far away versus a small one that's close to you and attached to your wrist. And just thinking about your players are not just holding a controller or just keyboard mouse anymore. Like if you have them, if to like select something that they're going to be doing all the time, who requires a gigantic arm motion, your user is going to drop out of that experience very quickly because they'll just get very tired. So just thinking about the physicality of the space and the physicality of the things you're asking your player or customer or user to do is really important.
Okay, So, what life, work, educational experiences would you say helped you the most with pursuing your career? And we can start with Noelle.
Sure. I love informational interviews. If you're exploring new career options and someone's work is really exciting you and interesting to you, never be afraid to ask to reach out and learn more about what they're working on and what they do. 9 times out of 10, they'll be super flattered. And it's kind of similar to this, where we have a dialogue and we get to talk a little bit about ways to expand and everything. I think everyone will always be excited to hear something like that, and that somebody that's new in this field is like excited to get involved.
I would really say, like, in terms of what got me to today and knowing what I'm doing, it's been kind of a cumulative effect. Like, every experience was important, even if it wasn't the right one at the time. So, like, working at my first job in development, like, I read hundreds and thousands of scripts in the time I was there. So I got a really good sense of story and character and plot. And I think that's something that I've kept with me in my entire career. And then kind of the production side, I got to learn how to just make something come to life. And so even taking the time in college, when I actually at NYU asked my advisor how to build a website, and he put me in a course where I learned C++. And I was like, that was not correct advice, but actually having that course for me by surprise has actually benefited me my entire career as I start talking and working with developers. So I would say, like, every experience, no matter where you are on the totem pole, is so important to helping you absorb and understand what you want to do next and how you carry that with you to your next job.
Yeah, I think along the same veins as that is something that I've had with me for my whole career is a love of learning. So when I'm working, I'm still on the side reading and learning and taking classes and just being, just finding things that I'm interested in and diving into it and learning more about it. You'll find that as your career progresses, like, you never don't use the things you learn. Like, a lot of the creative decisions and ideas just come from just the random amounts of information in your head that are just bumping into each other, and you come up with ideas that another person who has a different set of information in their head couldn't come up with. So I would just say having a love of learning and being open to learning new things, even if they seem daunting or hard, is something that will serve you your whole career.
Same. So.
Okay, lastly, we have this question. What are some things people interested in pursuing extended reality can do to start today? We can start with Will.
Oh, well, you can start today. Just, just go make something. Just make something. It doesn't matter. Like, my first VR game was I made, it was Dodgeball. It was a game called Super Duper Dodgy, and it was just controllers. Like, I can pick up a ball, and I added physics to the ball, and it was just me throwing. It was multiplayer. Me throwing a ball at somebody else, and we're just dodging the ball, and it was fun. And it took me a long time to do it, but yeah, just go make something, man. I mean, I think one of my very first things was a Google Cardboard application that just showed 360 videos. 360 photos, and it was for a real estate client that I had. I didn't even own a headset at the time. I knew Unity, and I knew it enough to convince them to pay me money to make something. I was like, I can do that. A phone, the headset. Oh, this 360, this camera just looks around the scene. Okay, let me do that. Yeah, so I convinced somebody to pay me to build something that I had no idea what the outcome would be. But it was just taking a leap just to do that, and that just kind of like snowball. So my advice, just go make something. Just the most basic thing.
Fully second that. That's exactly what I was gonna say. It was like, just make work. You can't learn without getting your hands dirty. I know the first thing I did was make a 360 video to see how it worked to tell a story in a space, and it was so bad, but it still got into film festivals because there weren't many people making 360 videos telling stories at that time. It's so embarrassing, but it is what it is.
Definitely.
Yeah, I totally echo that. I think just start creating, be playful, explore it, because only you are the person that's going to tell whatever story that you want to tell. Your experience is your own, and if you are wanting to share that in a VR experience, it really does go the extra mile, and only you can be the person to tell that story. So in anything creative, like I would just always start creating. I would also add, if you're looking into maybe even getting involved with similar programs, get involved with organizations that are doing really cool XR work, like the XR for Change initiative, like Tribeca, like Sundance, all of these really cool companies that are putting on events and doing this kind of stuff to showcase work. There's always internships or volunteering and opportunities to get involved and to really kind of expand your network and meet more people that are excited about the same thing you are.
Yeah, and you have a skill. You have a skill that you can bring to the table. Like there's always something that you can do. That's all. That's it.
All right, we will now open up the floor to questions from the audience. And the first one that we have says, one part of the industry they were hoping would grow during quarantine was VR. Have any of you noticed any evidence of this? And what creative uses of the technology have you seen that can push VR gaming forward?
I definitely have seen a growth in companies being interested in investing in this space again, more than they were the last year before quarantine or COVID happened. At least I felt it. I know there's a lot more conferences happening in immersive spaces, a lot more ways of us connecting. Like some of the traditional film festivals are creating or investing more in immersive spaces for us to meet up. So like Sundance this year had a place in South by, had replicated off downtown Austin in VR. I know there's been some immersive theater stuff that has happened. So I've definitely felt kind of a mini wave starting to happen again. Also lots of investment in the industry on immersive games and AR especially. Lots of headsets on the horizon that I'm hearing about. So I don't know, I'm definitely seeing a nice push of growth, which is exciting.
Yeah, I'm totally seeing AR being like a huge market that's getting more and more development and funding. And it's interesting because I almost didn't see a lot of the change in VR until I got a headset myself. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. I'm noticing that there are all of these like VR kind of social networks and different ways that that are really kind of popping up more explicitly during quarantine, especially in this last like kind of year or so. So yeah, like Jessica said, it's certainly kind of I sense the wave kind of growing again, and it's really exciting to kind of get to see where it takes us.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing. Just kind of same as Jessica. It was people that I would talk to 3 years ago that wouldn't even touch a headset. Now they have one in their homes or two, and you just see kind of the uptick of like people actually interested in it. It's like they want to be in it for the long run because like we don't know what it's going to look like 2022 to 2023 on kind of on. And I feel like there is a wave of people. So I do a lot of like workshops and stuff like that. And usually it's basically like college or youth kind of program stuff. And now like the students are bringing the parents because the parents are interested in learning some kind of VR situation. So it's like when you see like the generational gaps being closed and parents are playing Rec Room with the kids, which is like crazy.
I love that.
Yeah, so I just think it's gonna be like this is it. I think it's gonna move forward in a big way. So
yeah, as far as the second part of the question for creative uses of the technology and pushing VR gaming forward, I think there's a couple things. Like we've seen people experimenting more with facial tracking so that you can show more emotion on the face on your avatar or whatever. There's a lot more people pushing on hand tracking and figuring out the user interfaces that use hand tracking, which I think is really interesting and has a lot of pitfalls. I mean, if you look at Leap Motion and the trouble that they had, it'll be interesting to see how other companies solve some of those problems. Otherwise, I think it's the same things that VR has always had an issue with, which is like one, ease of use and ergonomics, and two, quality of output. So there's sort of like two converging lines where like right now you can get a cheap headset, but the display looks terrible. You can get a really expensive headset and it looks great, but a lot of times you have to do a lot of setup for it. So you're seeing more all-in-ones, you're seeing better displays. Like the supply chain is changing. A lot of people are not just repurposing screens that were meant for mobile devices, which is what the first generation was. And there's a lot of companies creating displays and lenses specifically for VR use, which is really exciting and will help change costs. So I think a lot of that stuff is ongoing, and it'll just get better with every generation.
Yeah, I want to add one more thing to the soft skill question, also to the interest in the pursuit. There's a lot of interest in like Instagram and Snapchat filters because they are a form of AR, and a lot of brands, a lot of people are actually interested in building those things, and also that's a good way to learn 3D space too. So look into those. Snapchat Lens Studio and Spark AR for Facebook, Instagram filters.
Okay, our next question is, how important would you say advanced mathematics is in being successful?
I can't do advanced math. Definitely not for me. But I think I'm in a different kind of space. I'll definitely let Will and Lawrence kind of, and Jessica too, just kind of weigh in.
Yeah, I think it depends on what kind of, like the question says, as a game developer and designer. I think it depends, right? Like I would say a lot of the game developers and designers don't have very advanced math, although I know some game developers and designers that have extremely, extremely good math skills. But you generally don't need everyone on the team to have that in order to like ship a product. And it also depends on what kind of game you're making. If you're making an indie game that doesn't require a lot of physics simulation and doesn't have a lot of advanced AI, you probably don't need much math. If you are very ambitious and want to create a programmatically generated environment that will be different every time people load the game, you might need a little math. So I think it really depends.
Same. I think with the programming side of it too, like there's a lot of like visual scripting programming, so you don't really have to learn a lot of the math part of it because the scripting just does the math for you. But you still have to learn what the visual scripting does, the pieces they'll do. But yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is. But yeah, just what Lauren said, like you don't need a lot of math. Depends on the job.
Depends, and also, I mean, part of it is you'll learn what you need to learn when you're making the thing you want to make, right? So if you're coming up on a problem, you're like, oh shit, I have to learn. Yeah, I have to apply trig here. Then you better brush up your trig if you want to have that feature.
Yeah, because your passion will push you into that. Like I've learned so much stuff that I didn't even want to learn. Like I was learning like some kind of math problem. I was like, man, I gotta learn this to get what in my brain out into people's hands. So yeah.
I also want to just say, because I'm not good at some of these things, but the VR community is pretty amazing. And so I found that if I reach to the community, that somebody might be able to help me with a specific piece that's not hard for them, but might be super hard for me, and vice versa. Like I can help solve a problem for somebody that maybe doesn't understand what I know. And so I think right now it's been a really fun time to be in this world and community because we're so collaborative.
Yeah, I'll also add, maybe it's worth reframing the question as well to focusing on advanced programming in general. Because I think that's something that's really helpful for developers and designers. Like when you have that programming expertise, the math will kind of naturally follow along as like you're kind of looking up all of this kind of API and like some of the technical terms as you're working. So I think that also kind of would help with a lot of the like development side and a lot of the engineering piece.
For our last question, in a few words, how different is coding for VR and AR compared to other games? Would you say it's harder or just different?
I'd say it's different, but there are more constraints and when you're making a 2D game, if you don't do a good optimization performance pass, you just lose frame rate. If you do the same thing in a VR title and you lose frame rate, then you make your customer puke. So you got a lot more. You got to watch your frame rate. That's the main thing I would say.
I also think how you move your viewer through space is really different. Thinking about puking, I like some of the early VR games, I could not, because the mechanism they used to move me forward in space was just like, my face would go green. So I think also remembering that like the natural tendencies of how people want to move in a world.
Yeah, I think one of the first lessons we learned in my courses was never to like move the player. And I think that we see some varying degrees of success with that. Sometimes like if you yourself are being moved, if your brain isn't the person that's doing the moving, it can overwhelm and be a little disorienting. So sometimes you can see that works really well. Other times it really doesn't. But that's always can be a real challenge when developing is kind of thinking about movement in a space, especially in like fixed off pieces and thinking about how much moving you have to do to actually get to like whatever location you're trying to convey in like real life versus like in this virtual world.
Yeah, I also think there are some really clever ways to give the viewer control of how they move. Like I did an experience where they actually like put something on my diaphragm and I could use my breath to move through space. And it ended up being like a really cool meditative experience, which I wasn't expecting, but you were kind of moving through a world in a cool way. Also like teleporting. And so there are some new mechanisms that maybe didn't exist that are extended to the library.
I once moved in VR by swimming. Just thought it'd be a good anecdotal evidence, like add. Like there's so many different ways that people are doing things with motion, but it's definitely really cool. Like there's lots of different ways to get around disorienting.
Thank you, panelists, for your answers, and we have run out of time. Thank you, everybody, for showing up to this event. And again, thank you, panelists, for your insight and answers to our questions.